Lights will guide you home, and I promise I will burn for you, by rayrae118. Over the next week, Harry was busy helping Snape with the potion, in between defense lessons, and helping Blaise, Luna and Daphne with their wandless magic and animagus transformation. After a week's hard work, the potion was ready. As Harry had posited, the shade was slightly darker blue than the original, with a pale grey smoke that drifted up from the cauldron and gave it a mother-of-pearl sheen. Remus took the first goblet they offered him, and with a deep breath, knocked it back as quickly as possible. He shuddered, and Harry shrugged apologetically. As of yet, I haven't figured out a way to improve the taste. Remus shook his head, smiling. It's all right, Harry. What you have done is more than enough. Harry blushed. We still don't know if it will work, he reminded the werewolf. Remus rested a hand on his pseudo-nephew's shoulder. I trust you, Harry. You've got a great mind in that head of yours. I believe in you. Harry now resembled a tomato as Remus left the room. Snape rolled his eyes. One of these days, Potter, you're going to have to learn how to take a compliment. Harry threw a half-hearted glare at the potions master, but didn't reply. Line break. A week later, Remus and Sirius were preparing to leave for the new moon. They had planned to spend the night at Remus's old cottage. He hadn't really lived there in a couple of years, but it would make a good spot to wait out the night. They received a surprise when they reached the entryway. Harry and his friends were all waiting for them, similar expressions of determination on their faces. Remus shook his head, suddenly worried. No, he protested. You're not coming. Harry raised an eyebrow. Who said you were going anywhere? He asked reasonably. The way I see it, we've got a nice expanse of land right outside these doors. Remus wasn't giving in, though. It's too dangerous, he said firmly, looking at Sirius for backup. Sirius just shrugged helplessly. Harry looked at Neville. Without saying anything, the Longbottom heir transformed into his wolf form and headed out the open door. Harry turned back to Remus. We're all capable of handling it, he said calmly. Ron and Hermione both transformed and followed Neville. Remus just kept shaking his head. I don't... Harry glanced at Susan, and she transformed into an eagle, flying out through the open doors. His eyes were amused as he turned back to Remus. Face it, Remus. We're not letting you go through this alone. Being a wolf means being part of a pack. We're your pack. Ginny transformed now, rubbing up against Harry's leg before bounding out of the door. Sirius chuckled. Looks like you're outnumbered, Moony. Best to know when you're defeated. He then turned into a dog and barked, wagging his tail. Remus sighed, shaking his head. Harry shrugged, not looking apologetic at all. Come on, Moony. He jagged his head to the door. It's almost time. Harry then changed into a panther and looked up at Remus, his green eyes pleading. The marauder groaned exasperatedly. Even in animal form, Harry knew how to hit him where it hurt. He just couldn't resist those eyes. He nodded, sighing again, and followed Harry as he ran outside. Line break. The next morning, Remus woke up early and looked around. He was outside, surrounded completely by multiple sleeping animals. He was surprised as he sat up. Never before had such a task been so easy. Usually, getting up was a chore, muscles protesting, injuries screaming for attention. Another look around showed him that they were on the Quidditch pitch. Nearby, he spied a pile of cloth, and he quickly made his way over, still marvelling at the lack of pain he found himself in. The pile turned out to be a robe, and he put it on, smiling, knowing Minerva was responsible. Moony? Sirius's query broke him from his thoughts, and he turned around, the smile widening. Padfoot, he returned the greeting. Sirius had known Remus for over 2 decades, and even when they had been 11 years old, his friend had always had an air of heaviness and a weight surrounding him. But the friend who stood in front of him today, it was as if a huge burden had been lifted from his shoulders. Remus looked years younger. The other animals were stirring now, and one by one transforming back to human. Harry studied Remus carefully. "Did it work?" he asked, his gaze worried. Sirius's smile widened. "Congratulations, Harry. Your changes were brilliant. I feel better than I have in years." Harry grinned. "That's great, Remus." Ginny gave him a hug. "You hear that, Harry? You're brilliant." Harry shrugged mentally. "Snape helped," he protested. Ginny shook her head as they all started to head back inside. "You were the one who came up with the improved potion." "Snape just helped you brew it. Your inferiority complex needs to stop, Harry." "You're amazing. Just embrace it." Harry blushed slightly, but didn't reply as they entered the castle to get ready for the day ahead. Line break. Summer continued to pass as Harry and his friends kept busy. There were order meetings that the adults had to attend, but they also met together with Harry and his friends once per week to discuss their own plans and observations. They had all had the blinders effectively ripped away and spent most of the order meetings watching Dumbledore carefully. All were amazed at how many times the leader of the light trotted out the phrase, "for the greater good," and how manipulative he was to get his way, all while hiding behind his grandfather personality and twinkling eyes. Snape was officially introduced as their newest ally, and though he didn't actually use the words, he was happy to be involved in a group that had a leader that didn't force him into anything, or blackmail him into doing what they wanted. The end of July came before they even realised it, and Harry and Neville once more had a shared birthday party on the 31st. As the day fell on a Wednesday, Cedric couldn't be there, but Fred and George took the day off of preparing their shop for opening day in less than a week, to spend the time with their friends and family. The morning was spent playing Quidditch, and after a remarkable buffet prepared by the house elves, Harry and Neville spent most of the afternoon opening gifts. Neville's were, of course, mostly herbology related, while Harry received many books in various subjects. Both teenagers enjoyed the day. They spent so much of their time training. It was nice to take a day off to just relax. Line break. The next day, Harry and his friends were eating breakfast after their morning run, when a tap on the window drew their attention. Hermione squealed excitedly, hurrying to let several owls in. "It's our results!" she exclaimed. "I can't believe I forgot about them!" She passed the letters out to Harry, Ron, Neville, and Susan. Feeling his stomach try to reject the meal he had just consumed, Harry opened the letter slowly. Passing scores. O. Outstanding. E. Exceeds expectations. A. Acceptable. Failing scores. P. Poor. D. Dreadful. T. Troll. OWL results for Harry James Potter. Defense against the Dark Arts. O. Charms. O. Transfiguration. O. Potions. O. Ancient Runes. E. Arithmancy. O. Care of Magical Creatures. E. History. E. Herbology. E. Astronomy. A. He felt the knot in his chest loosen, relief seeping in. Minerva held out a hand, and he passed over his results. She read them over and then looked up at her charge, smiling. "Very good, Harry. I'm proud of you." He smiled and nodded his thanks. Hermione glanced over at him. "How did you do?" she asked, passing over her own results, as Harry took his letter from Minerva and gave it to his bushy-haired friend. Hermione's results were expected, Harry noted. Mostly outstandings with an exceeds expectations in defense. They passed around their results, and Harry congratulated Ron, Neville, and Susan on their scores. Ron had received 1 O in Charms, 3 E's in Defense, Transfiguration, and Potions, 3 A's in Care of Magical Creatures, Astronomy, and Herbology. He had, somewhat predictably, failed History and Divination. Neville had gotten the expected O in Herbology, as well as, surprisingly for him, but not for Harry, an O in Defense, E's in Charms, for Transfiguration and Potions, A's in Arithmancy, Care of Magical Creatures, and Astronomy, and he, like Ron, had failed divination and history. Susan had also done well, with an O in charms, potions and defence, and ease and everything else. Minerva congratulated all of them and mentioned that the school letters would most likely be sent out within the next day or so. Blaze, Luna and Daphne flew over shortly, but after that, and the two Slytherin 6th years shared their own results. Both had passed everything except history and had done well with mainly O's and E's. The rest of the day was spent with Sirius and Remus putting the teenagers through their paces. Blaze, Luna and Daphne, while newcomers, meshed quite well with the others, and were definitely improving. None of them had been slouches on the battlefield beforehand, but under the two marauders, they were learning new tricks and fine-tuning the ones they had already had under their belt. Line break. Snape held in his grimace as he opened the door to allow several less than welcome guests into his house. He refused to call it a home, since he really had no desire to actually live here. He had left his father's house immediately after graduating from Hogwarts, with intentions never to return. After the bitter man's death, he decided that the house on Spinner's End would make a decent hidey hole, and had taken up residence, performing a few charms to put the deeds in his name, and more than a few wards to ensure no one knew he was there. Bellatrix Lestrange sneered at the potions master as she brushed past him. Narcissa Malfoy followed her sister, though her expression was carefully blank, as the three of them made their way into the sitting room. Lestrange, Snape glowered. Narcissa? To what do I owe the pleasure? The sarcasm in his voice was easy to pick up on, but both women ignored it. Bellatrix's sneer deepened. Cut the pleasantries, Snape. This isn't a social call. You weren't at the last meeting, and I find myself curious as to why. Snape raised an eyebrow. The Dark Lord was aware I could not be present, he replied calmly. Dumbledore required my presence, and not to be there would cause him to question my loyalties. Surely you can understand the delicate nature of spy work, Bellatrix glared. Dumbledore may not be the only one questioning your loyalties, Snape. You've been in the old man's pocket for so long, perhaps you've switched sides. Snape glanced over at Narcissa. Mrs. Malfoy did not look like the well-to-do lady of House Malfoy he had known for so long. There was something in her gaze that set alarm bells ringing. Fear. He turned back to Bellatrix. Fortunately for me, I don't have to answer to you, he replied, his voice silky smooth. The Dark Lord trusts me. That should be enough for you. Bellatrix huffed. I use my own eyes, Snape, and I think you're too close to Dumbledore and his Order of the Flaming Turkey. Snape almost allowed himself a small smile. Are you questioning the Dark Lord? Bellatrix shook her head, suddenly wary. Of course not. Snape leaned forward slightly. Yet you question his trust in me. Tread carefully, Bellatrix. Those who question the Dark Lord have a habit of not living much longer afterwards. Bellatrix's sneer returned. Be careful yourself, Snape. One of these days your smooth tongue will not be able to get you out of trouble. She turned on her heel and headed towards the door. Come, Narcissa. Narcissa studied Snape for a moment longer before she nodded austerely and followed her sister out. Snape waited until the wards told him that they had departed, before he sat down with a heavy sigh. Bellatrix would always be suspicious, but Narcissa's attitude was surprising. He felt that the Lady Malfoy was coming to the same harsh conclusions that he himself had reached many years earlier. There was nothing to be gained by following the Dark Lord. He wondered if there was some way he could speak with her privately, but knew it would have to be handled with care, and he wouldn't tell Dumbledore his theories. He had no desire for Narcissa to become a pawn in the old man's schemes. But perhaps he should share this information with Minerva and Sirius. Both were capable of keeping the secret, with strong occlumency shields, and more than that, they weren't manipulative like Albus was. He resolved to bring up his opinions and observations the next time he met with them. Line break. Just as Minerva had estimated, Hogwarts letters arrived as Harry and his friends were eating breakfast the next morning. Blaze, Luna and Daphne were there as well, having joined the others for their morning run. Several owls tapped on the window to get the attention of the group, and Minerva went to gather the letters, handing them out with a small smile to the teenagers. Harry was distracted as he broke the seal of his letter by Ginny's squeal of excitement. He looked up and smiled proudly at seeing the shiny badge in her hands. "Congratulations, Gin!" he beamed. "I knew you'd get it." "I find myself quite looking forward to the coming year." Luna's dreamy voice came from a few places down the table. They all looked at her and found her holding a badge similar to Ginny's. Blaze smiled and leaned over to give his girlfriend a peck on the cheek. "Congratulations, Luna." Luna glanced over, her expression sharpening slightly as she met her boyfriend's gaze. "Yes, I do think this year will be a good one," she commented airily, her smile widening. Ginny cleared her throat. "Open your letter, Harry. If I'm not mistaken, you've got a shiny badge of your own in there." Harry raised an eyebrow. "I'm already a prefect," he commented, chuckling when Ginny huffed and slapped him lightly on the shoulder. "You know what I meant," the redhead glared. "Now, open your letter." Harry shook his head, sighing, putting a put-upon expression on his face. Pushy. He grumbled. Ginny's glare intensified and Harry winced slightly. "All right, I'm doing it." He opened the letter the rest of the way. As expected, a shiny badge fell out. He picked it up and ran a finger across the gold letter C. Ginny beamed. "You're going to be great." She kissed him on the cheek. Harry smiled and looked at Ron. "I might need your brain to help me come up with strategies, mate," he offered. "You up for it?" Ron nodded, grinning. "We're gonna kill it this year," he replied. Hermione rolled her eyes, but her expression was fond as she looked at her boyfriend. Harry nodded his agreement, but it was Ginny who replied. "Was there ever any doubt?" she asked rhetorically. "I mean, now that there are starting chaser positions open, I'll be playing regularly." "Of course we're going to wipe the pitch with the other teams." Harry raised an eyebrow. "What makes you so sure you're going to make the team?" he asked impishly. "Last I checked, the captain has the final say." Ginny returned the raised eyebrow. Harry lasted approximately 3 seconds before he caved. "Of course, Gin. You're amazing. Of course you'll make the team." The others all laughed at Harry's pleading expression and Ginny's satisfied smirk as they left the table and headed down to the training room. Line break. The next few days passed relatively quietly. Sirius had had to spend most of the time in the courtroom as the Wizengamot tried all of the Death Eaters they had captured at the Ministry in June. He told the others what was going on each evening, but he was pretty tired from having to deal with all the politics. Fortunately, everything was going smoothly, and by the end of the week, all of the Death Eaters, including Malfoy, would undoubtedly be sentenced to Azkaban. Fred and George had their shop opening towards the end of the week, and after a lot of convincing, Harry and his friends convinced their parents and guardians to let them check it out. When Harry and Minerva arrived at Diagon Alley, along with Molly, Ron, Ginny, Hermione, Susan and Neville, they found it to be just a shadow of its former glory. People rushing about to complete their business, heads down and cloaks drawn tight around them. It hurt Harry to see, especially when he compared today's visit with his first trip to the alley, before his first year. The place had been so joyful then, noisy and colourful and cheerful. Now it was dark and gloomy, even with the sun shining down on them. "All right," Molly said, hurrying them down the street, her eyes darting around for threats. "Just a quick trip, understand? We get your school supplies, we visit the twins' shop, and then we go home." They all nodded and made their way to Gringotts first. Susan and Neville had been given funds by their guardians, so Minerva suggested the teenagers wait in the lobby while she and Molly went to their vaults. Harry bit his lip and glanced at Ginny, before he turned back to Minerva. "I was hoping to go to the Gryffindor vault," he informed her softly. "Do we have time?" Minerva hesitated, but seeing the look in Harry's eyes, she nodded reluctantly. He wouldn't have asked her unless he really needed to go down there. "All right," she agreed. "We'll take a cart then." Harry tilted his head slightly. "How about if Ginny and I go to my vault and meet you back up here? It would save some time." Minerva narrowed her eyes, but agreed with his plan. and the four of them made their way to the Goblin Tellers. Soon enough, Harry and Ginny were sitting in a cart, headed down to the lowest level of Gringotts. Their Goblin guide stayed in the cart as Harry and Ginny stepped out, though he did try to warn them of the wards on the vault as they walked up to the door.
"Only blood relations may enter," he called out.
Harry glanced behind him and nodded.
"I know," he replied calmly, "but I would be correct in assuming that our bond would give Ginny special circumstances."
The Goblin considered and then nodded slowly.
"Perhaps," he acquiesced.
Ginny smiled and touched his hand onto the magnificent griffin carving on the door. It melted away and he stepped inside. Ginny followed him, relieved that she could enter the vault, and then stopped, shocked at what she saw around her. Piles of gold, silver and bronze, weapons, jewellery, bookcases filled to capacity. There was even furniture. "Harry," she breathed, captivated by the sight. Harry looked at her and shrugged.
"I know. It's pretty impressive,"
he agreed mentally. Ginny snapped out of it and moved forward to join him. "So, what is it you need from here?" she asked. Harry moved immediately to bookshelves.
"The goblins said that there might be information here that Gryffindor left. I'm hoping I can find it."
Ginny furrowed her brow. "What sort of information?" Harry fingered a few books and moved his hand over several folders that were sitting on the shelf. He pulled them down and rifled through them. "Harry?" Ginny asked when there was no response. Harry looked up and smiled.
"I think this is it," he said, his mental voice excited. "Information on the Gryffindor family in particular. The Lion's Castle. The house he had built for his youngest son to protect him."
Ginny leaned forward. Harry had told her about what he knew of the Gryffindor family, including the journal that he had found in this very vault the year before. She was just as curious as he was, but both knew the others would be waiting for them. Harry looked at her.
"I want to try something,"
he said, his eyes sparkling. Ginny nodded and watched as Harry concentrated on the folders in his hands. A few moments later, when she was starting to wonder what he was trying to do, she felt a surge of magic leave his hands, and the folders shrunk down to the size of a matchbox.
Harry looked back up and grinned. "I was thinking it might be a good idea to develop this wondrous magic talent," he informed her. "It could come in handy, especially in battle."
Ginny nodded, agreeing. "We need to get back, Harry, but we'll definitely work on that idea later." Harry put the shrunken files in his pocket and was about to join Ginny when something on the shelf right next to where he had found the files caught his eye. He picked it up and flipped through it. His gasp caught Ginny's attention. "Harry? What is it?"
Harry looked up, his eyes wide. "It's a book on soul bonds," he explained mentally, his fingers caressing the cover. "It's not the one we found before, but I think Godric wrote it himself."
Ginny smiled eagerly. "Take it! Maybe we'll learn something more about our bond." Harry nodded, pocketing the book as the two headed back to the lobby. The others were all waiting for them, and without further delay, they headed back into the alley. The first stop was Madame Malkin's, where Hermione and Neville needed new robes. The others could make do with the ones they had, thanks to charms that allowed the fabric to extend a few inches for growing room. Harry knew he'd probably need new robes next year, but for now, he was all right. It was amazing how much he had grown since leaving his aunt and uncle's house. He was rapidly approaching 6 feet now, and if he was lucky, he might even pass it within the next year. Ron was still taller, of course, but he was pleased to have lessened the gap. After Madame Malkin's, they stopped to buy parchment and quills, and then potions ingredients for those who were still planning on taking the subject. Namely, Ginny, Hermione, Harry and Susan, as Ron and Neville hadn't received the required O to make it into Snape's NEWT class. In flourish and blots, they picked up their schoolbooks and then made their way back to the alley. Molly glanced at her daughter. "Ginny, I need to get you a present for making prefect," she commented. "What would you like?" Ginny blinked, startled. "Like?" Molly nodded. "I got your brother's presents for making prefect, so I need to get you one as well." "What do you want?" "You don't need a new broom, so I could get you some new dress robes if you like." Ginny glanced at Harry, who was smiling proudly at her, and then back to her mother. "I would like a pet," she commented, looking over at the magical menagerie. Molly nodded. "Would you like an apple?" We got Percy an owl. She cut herself off at the mention of her third eldest son. Percy still hadn't contacted them, even with Fudge out of office, and Harry's story on you-know-who's return proved true. And she missed him. Ginny bit her lip. Not an owl. I was thinking I'd like a cat. Molly blinked, clearing herself from the unhappy thoughts, and smiled wanly at her daughter. Of course, dear. Shall we go inside and take a look around? Ginny nodded, grinning. Thanks, Mum. Molly looked at the others. How about we meet you all at the shop in a bit? Minerva nodded, gesturing for the teenagers to come with her. Harry glanced at Ginny, and she nodded slightly. He turned to his guardian. Can I go with Ginny and Mrs. Weasley? Minerva and Molly shared a look before they agreed. Harry and Ginny followed the Weasley matriarch into the menagerie. Unlike Ailop's Owl Emporium, the magical menagerie hosted many types of animals, from owls to cats, toads, snakes, and rats. Ginny led them over to the section on cats, and walked down the row, searching for some sort of connection. Harry followed her quietly, knowing that she wanted to concentrate. She was looking for the same sort of bond that he had with Hedwig. Ginny felt something pull her towards the end of the aisle, so she followed her instinct, and found herself standing in front of a small kitten. It was mostly white, fading to a darker grey on its paws and ears. Its eyes were a startling blue, and Ginny found she couldn't look away. She reached out with one hand and let the kitten sniff her. It did so wearily, before closing its eyes and rubbing against the offered appendage, purring. Ginny smiled and pet the kitten. Hello, little one, she murmured. How would you like to come home with me? The kitten opened its eyes and blinked slowly. Taking that as a yes, Ginny picked up the small animal and turned around. Harry smiled, looking at the content kitten. It looked very comfortable in Ginny's arms. He reached out and offered his own hand, and after a moment the kitten was purring loudly as he rubbed its head. I think you found a keeper, he commented. The shopkeeper came up to them at that moment. Hello there, young lady. Find something that you like? Ginny nodded, and looking at the kitten in her arms. I'll take this one. The shopkeeper inclined his head. She's not usually so docile, he commented, puzzled. Got some Kniezel in her, so watch out for her bite. Just about 2 months old now. You want a carry box for her? Ginny nodded, and the shopkeeper left, collecting the carry box along with a few other things Ginny would need to take care of her new pet. Molly looked a little worried at how much everything would cost, but Harry didn't give her time to argue as he pulled out his money bag. Mrs. Weasley, the kitten is your present. Everything needed to take care of her is mine. Molly almost protested, but decided it wasn't worth it, and just sighed and nodded. As they left the store, Harry glanced down at the kitten. What are you going to name her? He asked curiously. Ginny bit her lip, considering. It wasn't until they reached the door to Fred and George's shop that she came up with the answer. Selene, she replied firmly, like the goddess of the moon. Harry nodded, smiling. I'll like it. Molly's moan drew them out of their conversation. The Weasley matriarch was staring with dismay at her son's new shop. What were they thinking? She muttered. Harry and Ginny looked at the storefront and started chuckling. The whole thing was done in a mess of clashing colours. Purples and oranges and greens. It looked horrible, and yet was so the twins. Come on, he opened the door. Let's go inside. Once inside, it became apparent that Molly would not need to worry about her sons supporting themselves. The store was packed. Harry recognised a few of his classmates as he and Ginny split their focus between looking at the wares on the shelves and searching for their friends and family. There was everything from skiving snack boxes, value packs full of candies like fever fudge and nosebleed nougat, to extendable ears which allowed a person to hear a conversation taking place a distance away. Perfect for every prankster. Reusable hangman, the Wonder Witch line, 10-second pimple vanisher, love potions and the like, and even a section dedicated to Muggle joke products. Fred sidled up next to Harry as he studied the various Muggle products. Put that in for Dad, the Weasley twin commented. Harry glanced over and smiled. I bet he'll like that, he commented. Fred nodded. We figured there were others like Dad who are fascinated by Muggle things, and they might like it as well. It probably won't be a big money maker, but it'll amuse some people. A shout drew his attention away for a moment while Harry continued to look around. He picked up a skiving snack box and looked it over. Have anything you want. It's on the house. Harry looked back up and saw Fred standing next to him again. He shook his head. I can pay, he argued. Fred just looked at him sternly. Anything for our silent partner, he said, his tone giving no room for an argument. Pick what you want. We won't accept any money from you. Harry wanted to argue, but Fred hurried away at another shout. So Harry just shrugged and turned back to the shelf. He added a few more products to the snack box in his arms and moved on, running into Ron, Hermione and Ginny, who were checking out the extendable ears. These are remarkable, Hermione commented. The magic the twins have used to create all of these is really quite extraordinary. Harry smiled. Most people don't realise how brilliant Fred and George really are, he replied. With all their joking and pranks, they just overlook the work that goes into actually pulling those pranks off. If the twins had actually applied themselves to their studies, I think they would rival you for OWLs. He looked at Hermione. They all looked a little startled and rueful, realising they were all guilty of underestimating the twins at times. Ron shrugged. If you've seen them in action for 15 years, you'd really understand their brilliance. Ginny snorted. True. Those two really know how to use their brains. Fred chose that moment to join them. You got money to pay for that? He asked Ron, raising an eyebrow. Ron looked down at his armful of snack boxes, extendable ears, wildfire whiz-bangs, and portable swamps. Can't I get some kind of discount? He argued. Fred shook his head. That'll be 9 sickles, 3 canuts. Ron's eyes widened. But I'm your brother! Fred raised an eyebrow. So? We've got to do business, little bro. 9 sickles. I'll knock off the 3 canuts. Ron grumbled and walked away. His back turned. He didn't see Fred smirk. Make sure you put those back where you found them, he called after his brother's retreating figure. Ron made a rude gesture behind them, which was unfortunately noticed by Mrs. Weasley, who started berating him for his impoliteness. The teenagers all chuckled before Fred pulled Harry aside. Come here, he said, weaving through the crowds. I want to show you something. Harry followed the redhead into a side room. This section of the store was much smaller and quieter. Fred gestured for the shelves. Our defense line, he stated proudly. Peruvian instant darkness powder, decoy detonators, shield cloaks, and the like. Harry looked around him. This is impressive, he commented. Fred shrugged. We thought we'd take a page out of your book and be prepared. This line should help us out with our little Dark Lord problem. Harry smiled. I think it'll really come in handy. The young witch stuck her head through the curtain that blocked off this section for the store. Mr. Weasley, you're needed out front. Fred puffed up at the words Mr. Weasley. Be there in a flash, Verity. He looked back at Harry. Anything you want, Harry. That covers this room as well. I'll see you later. Harry nodded and looked around the room, adding a few items to the pile in his arms before he went to rejoin his friends and family. George bagged all his items at the register before Minerva and Mrs. Weasley determined it was time to go home. Ron had ended up buying a skiving snack box and a pair of extendable ears, not having enough to afford anything else. Ginny, Neville and Susan had bought a few prank items of their own, while Hermione had mostly abstained, not being into practical jokes, though she did purchase a few trinkets from the Wonder Witch line. One of the perfumes smelt nice, and fortunately there was no enchantment on it other than enhance the smell. They all remained on their guard as they hurried down to the dreary alley and back to the leaky cauldron to use the flue. End of chapter. Hi guys, hope you enjoyed that. Good chapter, that one. So Gringotts, the training, all of it really. I like that Luna was a prefect. I really like that. It shows how much she's grown and how much they think the others will listen to her now. That's a really lovely touch. And of course the twins' shop. Love that. And I'm very curious as to what is in Godric's book on soul bonds. After all, I haven't read this one in ages, so yeah, I'm rediscovering it with you guys discovering it as well. Anyway, you guys know the drill. Like, comment and subscribe, hit the bell, blah blah blah. Take care my guys, gals and non-binary pals. I'll see you in another video. Bye!